Good morning, everybody. Identity politics is a cancer, and it's a very useful tool, however, to have in your toolbox, especially when you are a politician. And what they do is use it as a wedge issue, and they use it to move on from scandals they don't like. It doesn't matter if it's true, they'll have all the newspapers print reports about it anyway. And it's interesting to watch how that works to move on from a scandal. Anybody remember SNC? No? Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould? Anyway, it doesn't really matter because all of that's going to come out in October. But right now, the identity politics is being pushed and pushed and pushed, and there's pushback, both from the government within Canada and from outside Canada, from our allies and G7 leaders. We're going to get to that story in just a minute. But first, Maxime Bernier is tweeting, quote, "The Liberal strategy to divide attention from scandals is getting clearer by the day. Fuel racial tensions and shamelessly exploit them, even if it divides Canadians and causes conflict with our allies. The PPC's strategy is to unite Canadians around sound policies." And he links to an article. He links to the Globe and Mail article, but I am using the National Post. It's all done by the Canadian press, so it's the same article. So you can read either, they'll be the same. So National Post is reporting, quote, "Canada, international allies, butt heads over focus on white supremacism." Canada has been butting heads with some of its closest allies over the extent to which rising white supremacy at home and abroad poses a global threat, federal insiders say. The quiet but at times controversial diplomacy has come as Justin Trudeau's Liberals, gearing up for a federal election campaign this fall, try to portray Conservative leader Andrew Scheer and his party as soft on white supremacy and so-called alt-right views. And I want to pause here because I want to be very clear. Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party have nothing to do with white supremacy. And I am a CPC supporter, and I am within the party. I want to have a fair election about good ideas. And I don't think Canadians would put a white supremacist into the government. I just don't think they would. I think that if a person said that anywhere in the campaign, if they proclaimed white supremacist ideals or said that, yeah, white people are clearly better or anything like that, they would lose because Canadians don't vote those type of people in. So trying to paint an entire political party as white supremacists, well, sir, Justin Trudeau, you're actually just calling all Canadians white supremacists. It's shockingly tone deaf. And I mean, it's in line with all of the articles that are being written. There was an article written yesterday talking about how Justin Trudeau should abandon the Alberta pipeline, the Trans Mountain pipeline, and tell Alberta they have to get on side because Alberta is basically full of backwards hicks and misogynists and racists. And it's and you know, that's acceptable in Alberta. And that was by the person I did a whole piece on it yesterday. It was ridiculous, and it's patently not true. It is false. So this is, before we even get into this, it's false. Andrew Scheer is not a white supremacist, period. And the fact that they keep pushing it shows how little the Trudeau Liberals have going into this election. He's a white supremacist. We have no ideas. We have no idea what to do. Yeah, that's what they're saying. We have nothing, so we'll call him a white supremacist. Pfft, right. Good job, Justin. Ready for third-party status? Maybe fourth? My goodness. Okay, back to the article. During last month's G7 of foreign ministers in Dinard, France, Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland met with stiff resistance from some fellow attendees over the language she wanted to use in a joint communique, the Canadian press has learned. Freeland wanted the G7 to issue a joint statement after the mosque shootings that killed 50 people in Christchurch, New Zealand, but, quote, "It didn't end up going out because we couldn't get agreement from all other countries about white supremacy and Islamophobia," said one Canadian official who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the deliberations. Prior to that meeting, Freeland spoke at the United Nations General Assembly, where she singled out white supremacy as the greatest security threat facing the world, remarks that later sparked a clash with a Conservative senator during testimony before the Upper Chamber's Foreign Affairs Committee. When ministers met in France in early April, some of her counterparts pushed back against Freeland's assertion that white supremacy now poses broader threats, the official said. On Islamophobia and the threat of white nationalism, Canada, quote, "tends to be the country that speaks the most about these issues and pushes the hardest to get the language included in communiques," said a second Canadian official, also speaking on condition of anonymity, quote, "There are obviously important issues for us and something we've been trying to speak up about at home, but also abroad." The communique said G7 was, quote, "deeply concerned about resurgent forms of racism and discrimination, including anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiment, and the targeting of Christian minorities leading to violence worldwide. It pledged to combat, quote, manifestations of hatred and affirmed that, quote, benefits of faith and inclusion should be recognized and leveraged as a strength for humanity." I scroll down. A November 2018 report by the U.S. Justice Department found hate crimes across the U.S. had risen for a third consecutive year in 2017. In Canada, Statistics Canada reported a sharp increase in hate crimes in 2017. 2,073 incidents, up 47% over the previous year, and largely due to an increase in hate recently reported crimes incidents targeting Muslims, Jews, and Black populations, accounted for most of the national increase, especially in Ontario and Quebec. And well, if you've been paying attention, there is actually a rise in hoax attacks, and that's been something that's been being talked about as well. And it's quite interesting to have the uptick in hate crimes attributed to, probably white supremacy, because these groups are the most targeted. But really, if you look at the most recent Winnipeg hate crime, that turned out to be a hoax. And I'll talk about that a bit later today. But interesting to pay attention to, right? On one hand, they're saying these hate crimes are happening and there's a massive increase. And on the other hand, they're saying it's white people's fault. And there's no evidence to that. Mr. Bernier continues, well, another tweet, he says, rational facts from at the John Robson. And I said that media is pushing back as well as other countries. So we saw other G7 leaders refusing to put out a communique declaring that white nationalism, white supremacy is the biggest threat, et cetera, et cetera. And here is our media saying, quote, the vast majority of some 20,000 terror victims in the world year after year are not killed by white supremacists. The most common terror victims are non-white Muslims killed by non-white Muslim terrorists. And, well, here's the whole article. Let's do it. National Post is reporting, quote, sorry, woke brigade, white nationalism isn't a major threat. And here we go. It looked odd at the time. In late March, our foreign minister tweeted, quote, today at the UN Security Council, Canada condemned white supremacist terrorism. Sorry, I kind of stumbled on that, so I'll say it again. Canada condemned white supremacist terrorism. This grave terrorist threat must not be ignored and must be at the top of the agenda when we talk about confronting terrorism. Really, I thought? At the top? Is it the one most likely to kill people? Following the Easter massacre in Sri Lanka with over 300 dead, and which ISIL has now taken responsibility for, I think odd, looks today like an insufficient term. Naturally, everybody's against white supremacy, and with solid historical reason given the evil it did over the past 500 years. But for all the horror of racial slavery, the biggest killer in the 20th century were Mao, Stalin, and Hitler, and in no cases were skin color an issue. I scroll down. If you said anything that downplays white nationalism as an ideological force or source of violence, some fool will claim you're blowing a racist dog whistle and will probably misspell it. But the accusation is grotesque, because one thing that struck me immediately about Chrystia Freeland's tweet was its callousness about non-white lives. The vast majority of some 20,000 terror victims in the world year after year are not killed by white supremacists. The most common terror victims are non-white Muslims, killed by non-white Muslim terrorists. Wikipedia, for instance, says that 4 attacks last year killed over 100 people in each. In Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, and Nigeria, all by Islamists. Drill down to the monthly list of smaller incidents, and it's almost entirely non-whites killed by Islamists, with the occasional Maoist or purely local ethnic motive. Even if Freeland were concerned solely with Canadian lives, it would be difficult to explain why she considered white nationalism the top threat, or even grave. A Google search reveals lots of people hyperventilating about it, but the Wikipedia article on, quote, right-wing terrorism cites the left-leaning New America think tank's list of such deaths in the United States since 2001, and it's 86, an average of 5 per year. Everyone matters, but Nation of Islam member John Allen Muhammad alone killed 10 people of various races, ethnicities, and genders in 2002. Nidal Hassan killed 13 at Fort Hood in 2009, and what the Obama administration insisted was, quote, workplace violence. Then there's 9/11, or as the U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar put it, when, quote, some people did something. Obviously, white nationalists are squalid losers who can be dangerous. The man who killed 50 Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand, seems to have been primarily a bigot, though also anti-Muslim. And as I wrote at the time, such terrorists and their ideologies must be taken seriously, but devoting scarce anti-terrorist resources to the wrong threats leaves you vulnerable in ways that are irresponsible. When I saw Freeland's tweet, I thought there really needs to be an adult in the room. Sure, it's chic to condemn the West and white people, especially in an undergraduate seminar, but she's in government. Only one thing can be at the top of the agenda, and it should be those who kill thousands a year, not those who kill dozens or fewer. How many UN members have seen a single death due to white nationalist terror in the past, say, 50 years? Even Canada, the horrific 2017 attack on a Quebec City mosque was motivated by religious hatred, which is not the same as racism. There are a great many white Muslims and non-white Christians, but how many UN members have seen Islamist slaughter? I wish people like Ms. Freeland worried more about anti-Christian violence internationally. And again, whistle me no dogs, most persecuted Christians are non-white. From victims of Chinese government's repression to those driven from their historic Middle Eastern communities by mob violence, first they came for the Jews, even in Bethlehem. Meanwhile, good luck denouncing anti-Semitism at the UN. Still, the possibility of genocide, if Israel ever loses a war or the wrong people get nuclear weapons, should be near the top of our security agenda. As for the terror, specifically the Islamist kind, is the biggest threat, especially to non-white Muslims. Obviously, we're against all hate in principle and all terrorism in practice. But if we're going to prioritize, which we have to do, that's me, back to the article, it should be saving lives, not sounding, quote, woke, that tops our list. And white nationalism just isn't that big a problem. It may be ugly, but it has few adherents and kills few people. Yes, and so I find it interesting, the push. I find it interesting, the breathless reporting about these white nationalist attacks. And I've seen other newspapers listing, a list of names, I suppose, to get them into the public consciousness, but they say, 200, 300 members Canada-wide, et cetera, et cetera. And not to diminish that. One, I doubt that it's true, because really, I just doubt that it's true. And two, are those people coordinating attacks? When? Where? Can you show me newspaper articles? Because I've done entire shows on 1 week's worth of violence. And you can find those while searching in CanadaPoly.com or on the YouTube channel. But my point isn't that I've done other shows. My point is there's a lot of violence in the world, and not a lot of it is coordinated or put forward by white supremacists or white nationalists. So this push seems false. This push seems designed to turn the page on something, maybe scandals at the government, maybe SNC, maybe more. Who knows? I certainly don't, but I can speculate, and it looks fishy to me. It looks like it's made up, and it looks like it's fodder for the radical leftists who want to silence the conversation, because the conversation should be nuclear weapons, Islamic terrorism, and what's going on in Europe right now. Those three things should be topping our list, certainly not white supremacy. It's incredible how tone deaf this liberal Trudeau government is. What a failure. Check out the People's Party of Canada.ca, and I'm going to try and get one more video out today, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm so busy. You have no idea. I'm so busy. But it's so much fun. Thanks for watching, everybody. Really, thank you. I appreciate your time.